now. Free Palestine. 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 Free Palestine.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Apartheid Off Podcast with your hosts for today, Daniela and Joseph.
Thanks for that, Daniela. And today we are joined by someone who British MP Johnny Mercer called a Britain-hating anarchist who knows nothing of value. I guess for us on this show, what more of a perfect description for a guest. We're really excited to welcome Darren Cullen onto the show, who you may know as Spelling Mistakes Cost Lives. Darren, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Just to jump right into it, I guess then, first question we asked to all our guests, what drove you to get, what kind of led you to get involved in the political work and, the activism that you do today, Darren?
I think, I'm not sure exactly. I've always been interested in politics, but I've kind of come at it from different angles. My parents are both, all my family are Irish, a lot of them immigrants to the UK, and so it was kind of brought up in a very aware of British imperialism as an actual thing happened. I mean, that compared to say a lot of my school friends and stuff like that were completely oblivious to the fact that Northern Ireland was even a part of the UK, let alone what the history of Ireland and the UK was. And so it was quite strange going over there, every year and driving through Northern Ireland. And, I'd come back with these stories about how there's British troops on the streets of Northern Ireland. And as a kid, that's kind of cool, there's these army bases everywhere and there's helicopters flying over the place and stuff. Yeah. And all of my friends at school didn't believe me that a part of what is ostensibly this country would have such a militarized kind of presence. Whatever.
A bit like an action movie almost.
It's all the stuff that you'd seen in American action movies, and then it was kind of, but it's also kind of disconcerting as well because you stopped at checkpoints and a few times my parents were pulled over, family members pulled over by kind of loyalist paramilitary groups, which is really weird because at least because that these are just guys with guns essentially. There's no all the impunity that security services have, these guys have even more so, so it's terrifying. But I had a kind of a bit of a convoluted route to where I am now because I was, as a teenager, I had a paper round and I grew up in a very kind of conservative right-wing area. So every paper that I was delivering was the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun, and I would read them every single day, every single paper, all the way through to the opinion pages at least. And around 14, 15, I started to become quite right wing off the back of this. And by 16, I wanted to join UKIP. I had the application form and everything. Wow. I think some of it was probably a reaction against my parents being kind of Irish Republican, in that. But I think I was very fully indoctrinated by the papers that I was reading, and it wasn't until I went to art school and kind of got out. I stopped doing my paper. I went to art school, got out of Leeds, and went to Glasgow. That those kind of ideas started kind of falling away, and I started to kind of reappraise all these myths about British exceptionalism and British and the kind of the myths that I'd absorbed from the newspapers about a kind of a rose-tinted view of empire and an apologist kind of idea of empire. And I started to read more about what the actual British Empire had done, and I kind of linking back to what I've been told by my family growing up about British atrocities in Ireland. Started to kind of lead back or lead to the position I hold today, or the kind of the politics that I have today. So it's been quite it's been a bit of back and forth, but
we're here.
Yes. I think it's so. I'm pretty sure that there's not going to be any drift back towards the other way anymore.
Yeah.
But it did make me think actually really recently, because I've been thinking about the way that the kind of the radicalization kind of spiral or like kind of staircase or whatever you want to call it that like
Yeah.
the right wing have on things like YouTube and stuff now. It's kind of, I've been thinking about that. Like if I'd, when I was like 15, 16, if I'd started listening to Joe Rogan and he had like
Ben Shapiro and all those.
And he
characters.
had he had like Stefan Molyneux on, or any of these, like, and then you go listen to those guys' podcasts, and then I'm really terrified about how
it play out today.
And how hard it would be to come back from that necessarily as well.
I guess, Darren, one of the things, I guess for our listeners, to a degree, we can say, you're in the right place if you're listening to this podcast, at least in our terms. But I mean, it's definitely something that we all think about, in today's age. How do you think we do tackle these right-wing sources, whether that's someone investing into the control of social media, YouTube, as you said, or indeed the newspapers that you were reading and exposed to at a young age? I think one of the questions we have to, I think a lot of us are reflecting on, right, is how do we survive without being able to trust the people who give us the information that we see and read and experience every day in this kind of age of fake news and not being able to depend on experts anymore? It feels it's quite alienating at times. I'm sure you'd agree.
Well, because that's the thing with the media. I mean, they define reality in a lot of ways. That like the media is the window that we have onto the rest of the world outside our immediate kind of situation. So if that window is owned by billionaires who decide what gets shown in front of that window, then we're always going to have a warped, and the public as a whole are going to have a warped idea of what's going on in the world, what the priorities for fixing the things that are wrong in the world should be, and who are the bad guys, who are the good guys in each situation. And it's very difficult. And I'm super appreciative of a lot of the there's like not even just attempts, very successful attempts at alternative media. Subscribing to the Byline Times, and there's Dope magazine, and there's a whole load of alternative media, and this podcast is an example of alternative media, and it's like, but it's hard for that to break through into the mainstream consciousness because it's just not possible to have that reach without the capital that the billionaires who own the media have. But I think I don't know, you've got to do something, right?
Yeah, definitely. And kind of leading on to that and what we were speaking about before, what do you think your role is as an artist and as an activist within this reality, within this space in which, like you said, big companies own most of the media, big companies own most of what has been putting out there? How do you then fit into that world, and with what you do and how you promote it?
What I try and do is find ways of with my own work is try and find a way of rephrasing an issue that's maybe kind of entrenched on each side, this side good, this side bad, everyone's got their positions and it's solid. And to try and find a way to rephrase that in a way that's maybe not so obvious, so that potentially the people on the other side might be able to see it from another point of view. I don't know if that necessarily happens, but for example, I mean, in relation to Palestine, there's a comic book. I started work on a comic book. It's only a few pages so far, and I put them online, and it was called The Birth of Palestine. And it's a kind of sci-fi future scenario where the UN have decided that the Palestinian people have been persecuted for so long that they need a homeland, and they've decided that because Spain was Muslim for 800 years, that going to move the Palestinian people to Spain. And so it retells kind of the story of Israel-Palestine, but the Palestinians are now the Israelis and the Spanish are the Palestinians. So it confuses kind of. So and just seeing it, trying to force Europeans to have some empathy as to if this was done in Europe's backyard, basically, and the rest of the world would tell you just have to accept this situation that we're deciding, and then that new kind of colony that gets placed in that territory starts acting out, fighting, bombing his neighbors, and things like this. It's I don't know. It's just like it's an example of trying to find ways of retelling.
Definitely, and I think, I mean, one of the things that really attracted me to the work that you do, Darren, is the fact that I think it's fair to say you're one of the few major artists who go there, have kind of put those conversations in, as you were saying, in the window that
Right.
people are looking at, right? And another example I think that would be great to add to the one that you just mentioned, what is your museum of neoliberalism, which I love, because neoliberalism seems to be as much liberal as your museum was a museum, right? In like the sense that what was on show wasn't like a distant past, or wasn't hundreds of years ago. It was very much what all of us see and experience today. And I remember one of the what the quotes you had on the wall was an Alan Greenspan quote, saying it hardly makes any difference who will be the next president. The world is governed by market forces. And I wanted to ask, I guess on that note, how, because as much as your work may be a reaction to what's going on, it's also very much using, the realities and the truths of today, and, as you said, retelling them. But I wanted to get your opinion on, how does this affect, social justice issues such as Palestine, in the sense that, I don't know if it's too fair to say, but maybe the activism of today is very different to that of, before we were alive 50 years ago in the 60s, say, where it was more, that maybe there was a clearer route of, a democratic kind of uprising and, people having more power. Whereas today we can, even in the media terms, we can see that, power is really concentrated into a few people. And how does that affect your work and your activism, and maybe activism more generally? I know that's quite a big question.
Well, I mean, what was it? So with the, I think we've been disabused of a lot of the kind of ideas that, like, that the media was, that maybe that people held in the 60s, ideas that the media were there to speak truth to power, and the media were there to hold the power to account and stuff like that. And we've seen, especially during the kind of Corbyn era of the Labour Party, that the media is there as much to defend power as it is to question it, and it does it within certain parameters. If it does question it at all, and there's it's, especially in the UK, which is, I think, we kind of tell ourselves in the UK that we're this tolerant, and they're quite kind of like, socially open. System, but like it's particularly in the UK, the bounds of what is deemed politically acceptable especially for a mainstream political party to hold positions on, things to say has been, we've been really shown that there's where the hard limits are on on progress. But I think with the museum itself, there was, because a lot of my work has been about exaggerating reality in order to show how absurd it is. Like to take an issue and go, well, so like I did a project called Pocket Money Loans, which is a payday loan shop for kids, which was about the fact that, it's inspired by the fact that payday loan companies, especially at that time around 2013, 2014, were using very child-friendly imagery in all of their ads. So it was like cartoons, puppets, and things like this. So I was like, well, if they're aiming this stuff at kids, then like take it to its conclusion. Like, what would a financial products for children look like? Like bouncy castle mortgages and stuff like that. Well, with the Museum of Neoliberalism, I co-curated it with Gavin Grindon, who did he curated the museum that's in Banksy's Waldorf Hotel in Bethlehem. What we came to with the Museum of Neoliberalism is that we're not inventing things to show how absurd neoliberalism is, and we're just pointing at things, just taking out examples, like and just the reality in a lot of ways has become or has been for a long time like self-satirizing. There's things that you don't need to exaggerate. It just is completely insane.
So, Darren, self-satirizing or dystopian?
Yes. Not self-satirizing. It's dystopian as well, but like there's an aspect of self-satire to it. Like
for sure. No, I agree.
there's this poster that's in the museum, which is, you might have seen this, is the Delta anti-union poster that said union dues cost around $700 a year. A new video game system with the latest hits would cost around that. Why not put your money towards that instead of paying dues to a union? And this was like a legit, real poster. And this is a problem with the museum itself. Is like people came through it and they got to the end and they'd say, "Oh, love, it was really funny what you did with that that Delta Union poster," or "I really like what you did with the corporate sponsored Scout badges." And I'd be like, "I didn't do that. They exist. It's not
that exists." Yeah.
People thought it was just it was so absurd that it had to be satire.
Have you been approached then by any of these corporate companies to come up with the adverts like the Delta one?
It would be a brilliant marketing tool.
Maybe like a full circle of satire.
I mean, I did have a freelance copywriter who is a copywriter in advertising. They write the text, the copy for ads. He was following me on Twitter, and then he contacted me one day and said, he was like direct message asking me if he could run he's going to do an ad for Shell, and he wanted to run back some ideas by me. And I was like, because I've done anti-Shell work in the past about their greenwashing and stuff, and I was like, mate, I'm not going to tell you how to make your Shell advert better. Like, what do you think my problem with Shell is? That their advertising isn't good enough? I want to dismantle. I think that company should be dismantled, not kind of reformed or whatever. You know?
Yeah. No, going in kind of what you said and how you're using kind of, to be honest, real life reality, but using that in your own way and providing these facts in a very clear and obvious way. How have you found that, like what power lies in political satire and using that to point out what's going on in the world and point out what's going on by large companies or by the media and stuff like that?
It's tricky because I don't know if there's like power in the way that you might think in terms of like in terms of making propaganda, which or agitprop or whatever you want to call whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
You might think, I mean, on the surface, it might look like the point is to change people's minds, and that would be great if someone who's like a massive oil fanatic saw one of my posters and was like road to Damascus moment, like the scales have fallen from my eyes. I really like that it doesn't happen like that. I mean, I know myself from changing my mind over the various things I've changed my mind over, like big turns, like on things like this. It takes time. It takes years, and it's like it's like turning a ship around, and so it's impossible to say if like maybe these posters or videos or something might be part of that eventual shift in someone, but it will not be like an about turn. But I think more than that, there's something to be said for articulating things in ways that can be used by people who do agree with with these ideas or with these like kind of principles, I guess. Like making work that can be used by activists as part of their campaigns and stuff like that, I think is important. I think also there's something to be said for making people, or like helping people who agree with me on these things feel a little bit less insane. When you've got like I mean, when you like people contact me about, say, like especially in the UK, army recruitment advertising is ubiquitous. They're always trying to get more recruits. And it's very difficult to say anything against the military in this country. It's a hallowed, like kind of almost religiously protected institution.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think I've had people say to me that has made them feel better, like that they're not living in a complete, like the society isn't completely batshit, that there are people kind of skewering or like kind of letting the air out of some of these pompous kind of like, glory, death and glory kind of ideas and kind of propaganda from recruitment ideas. But Although there was actually some stuff that I think has had. I think it's very difficult to change someone's mind who's like deep in it. But people who are on the fence can be stupid, and maybe people who haven't necessarily thought about the things that you're raising. I don't know if you've seen there's a project that I did with a few, like, there's a ton of people involved in it, but I wrote these Action Man Battlefield Casualties short films. So
Yeah.
So it's like 3 short films, short adverts, toy adverts for PTSD Action Man, Paralyzed Action Man, and Dead Action Man. And it was the whole project was inspired by the fact that the UK recruits 16-year-olds, only country in Europe, only country in NATO that recruits 16-year-olds into its armed forces. And the British military also has a toy line that's aimed at ages 5 and plus. It's official Crown copyright British military toys for kids.
Yeah.
And I've been contacted by teachers who have shown those videos in class to kind of 15, 16-year-old kids, and they've had their students, some students come up to them and say, like, I was thinking about joining, and now I'm not thinking about joining.
How's that feel? How's that feel, Darren, when obviously, that's got a direct impact of your work, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's incredible. You can't ask for more than that, really. Like, especially on such a potentially pivotal decision for a young person to make. You know, like
life changing.
The rest of your life, yeah. And that's one of the things I've like, kind of one of the projects I'm most proud of, because we did it with Veterans for Peace UK, but they were very adamant that this film, although they got it made, they like got the funding and they put it out and they ran the press for it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
they were like, this belongs to any kind of like anti-war or anti-military recruitment group in the world can use this and take it. And so that's out there now. Any activist can use it, and that feels good. It's something that's not just a fleeting action. This is something that could be used by activists globally.
Yeah, and I guess on the topic of I just want to hang on this idea of the army in the UK. I guess widening up, it comes into warfare and state violence. I guess I think what we've been speaking about throughout this conversation so far, it hasn't really been too different. Whether that's the commodification of, I guess you could say, knowledge in a sense, or the marketization of knowledge, and also like the marketization of life in the sense that human lives seem to be kind of basically every human life kind of has a price in a sense, and I think it's something to this disparity between who is essentially commodifying and who is being commodified is actually just kind of accepted. It's been normalized this in this sense, and especially when looking at the diaspora of the Palestinian community, of many other communities that have been displaced by the very violence, the state-led violence that we've been touching upon. I guess how do you see because even as activists based in the UK, right, it's often very difficult to make the connection between why are we fighting for a cause that is so geographically
right
distant, but in as we've been speaking about, it's not at all in really, because we are the ones who it's the companies that our universities invest in, it's the companies that we buy our shopping from, that at the end of the day are the ones who are perpetuating as we focus on Israeli apartheid.
Stop the Arms Fair, their slogan was or is war starts here. Like all these wars start, like we're shipping out the munitions for all these conflicts.
Definitely. This reminds me of your piece, or your pieces done with the stickers done onto like supermarkets and put on through and stuff. Your question, Joe, and what you're leading to, and kind of the UK's involvement, because let's be honest, the UK is involved in most bad things that are going on in the world. The UK probably has a foot in it, to be frank. So I think that's why kind of like your piece or your artwork on the stickers with the fruit, I don't know, really resonated with me as someone who is trying to do activism for a country abroad or is really concerned about something like that, why that was so impactful and how that really helped see for people that knew about what I was fighting for but wasn't too sure about how it impacted them or how what they did impacted them. So I think something like what you did there was very, very important in kind of bringing it back to us and bringing it back to our involvement as a country.
Yeah.
And I guess the question here is, how do you see that balance between obviously what you put out and how it's received, and the intentions you have behind your work? I guess the purpose of what you put out is really, I guess, what we're coming at. How do you work within that balance? Of course, with such a highly politicized messages, I should say the highly politicized messages that you often put out. How do you, what position do you play once your work's, I guess almost like out in the open in that sense?
Well, there's not much you can do once it's out there. I have had like some right-wing guy take some drawings that I'd done and try and by memeing, like kind of altering them, trying to make right-wing memes out of them, that sucks,
Tedious.
So there's not much you can do once it's out there. I've never been like one for necessarily worrying too much about what's done to my work once it's out there. Like you can, I know some artists like put full kind of watermarks over things and stuff like that. Yeah. If someone wants to rip off or like alter your work, life finds a way.
They always can.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think like as you were saying about these stickers that I was putting on products in shops that advertised in the Daily Mail, I quite like about that project in particular was that I could see it kind of sparking ideas of other activists for like, oh yeah, we could do that about this kind of issue. We could do something similar about this. And like for some reason I got into this like kind of little genre of sticker based activism. I don't know why. but
very niche.
Yes, right. But there's something that like it just kind of struck me that you can change the it's about like changing the meaning of existing things, right? By adding a little sticker, by adding stickers to existing things out in public, like when I did a project attacking the Metro, because the Metro newspaper is owned by the Daily Mail, and so I was like putting these stickers on Metro distribution bins saying like, this is brought to you by the Daily Mail, but making them look as realistic as possible so that they kind of blend in. And you by just adding a small little sticker, you can change the meaning of this object. And you don't necessarily have to print or build the entire thing. Like there was a Sainsbury's banner last year outside the local Sainsbury's.
I saw this one. I loved it.
Yeah, the one that said like, Sainsbury's proudly supporting the LGBT community for like, whatever. And I just got some vinyl sticker letters and wrote underneath in the same typeface, whenever profitable and convenient. And a lot of people thought that I'd actually printed the whole banner, but no, it's just something you can add very cheaply actually to the bot. And there's a similar thing. I don't know if it's Brandalism or some artists that were connected to Brandalism did, where they were adding kind of like smoking warning signs, bars at the bottom of like billboards, about the dangers of advertising and stuff like that. That's like considering how big a billboard is and how much you need to print to fill a billboard. This is a very small, like little piece of paper. You can immediately change the meaning of the entire piece. So I'm very interested in that
I'd love to be in the conversations where obviously, you know, Sainsbury's of, I don't know, I'm imagining some kind of boardroom full of white men maybe who are like kind of, you know, reacting, you know, oh, you know, spelling mistake cost lives is
Well,
dangerous again.
Yeah.
It was weird with that, with the Sainsbury's banner, because they just took the whole thing down. I mean, they could have just gone out and peeled down the
They
letters
were
off it.
so
I think they were
scared and
looking-
frantic. They were like, get rid of it all.
Yeah, like how did this happen? And like,
So I think it's a really strong message, especially for like something like that, as it is Pride Month and stuff like that, where like a company will just change their logo to have like the rainbow flag in it and be like, yeah, cool, this is it. We're here for the LGBT plus community. And yet what you brilliantly done was underneath it highlighted how a company is a company. There's no such thing as really an ethical business in the society that we live in today. Obviously there are the few, but how brilliantly you can then just add a line in underneath just to change the whole meaning of something and really highlight that. Just because a company is saying, oh yeah, we support like our LGBT friends, doesn't mean that they necessarily do.
yes,
I don't know, I think it's brilliant in the way it's done.
Well, that is because that is the unsaid, you know, whenever profitable and convenient is the actual small print to any of those kind of assertions, right? Because like when any of these companies that have outlets in Russia are not doing Pride Month Russia, you know, campaigns in Russia or in like Bahrain or like wherever. So there's, I mean, it's kind of funny actually, because like my example that I was using last year was when I was talking about corporations not sticking their neck out was Black Lives Matter. I was saying, well, you know, corporations are all on Pride because there's no risk to their, you know, to their profit, but in supporting Pride. Where are they on Black Lives Matter? And then a year later, kind of like now Black Lives Matter has gone mainstream enough, I guess, in the public discourse that a lot of corporations have found it, except, you know, it's safe enough for them to come out in support of it. But where were they in Ferguson? You know, like where were they when this was like
exactly.
And I think, as I guess us three radicals, I guess here, like when we speak about intersectionality, you know, we frame those conversations, you know, as, you know, should be standard. Whereas, you know, as you've been, you know, as you just said, Darren, it seems to be like they just kind of, you know, they'll focus on one issue at a time, or, you know, it's slowly like a slow domino effect of, you know, when each one becomes almost marketable or as you said, acceptable to, you know, put out there. And I guess one of the things that I want to bring the conversation onto is, you know, as activists, myself and Daniela as students, you know, what role do you see for young people in, you know, following from, you know, I'm very much inspired by the work that you do. You know, how would you get involved in, you know, the kind of, I guess you know, term it as creative activism,
right?
That you know that your work is about.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I mean, subvertising as an act is very is a great way to, I don't know. So subvertising, if anyone doesn't know, it's basically you take existing ads down and replace them with either a political poster or what, you know, anything that's not an advert. Basically, you're tidying up the street if you go down. So I mean, I think there's something very satisfying about seeing kind of either a satirical message that you've made, that's kind of lampooning an existing ad or an existing corporate kind of response to something, and putting that in the actual ad spaces, because that then it has the weight and the power of official corporate communications or whatever. It is one thing to have like a kind of banner in your window or something like that. When it's in an ad space, feels like, hold on, are they, you know, if you're walking past that, most people aren't aware that it's possible to get into these things or to do, you know. So it has a kind of you know, people walking past going, why would Sainsbury's say that? Why would they why would they say the quiet part loud? Or I think subvertising is a brilliant tool. Obviously it depends what you do with it. I think something to always be aware of when you're making satire or satirical work in general is that sometimes when you're being satirical, you want to say want to say sarcastically what you think the corporations are actually saying.
Yeah, yeah.
But there can be a danger if you rely too much on that sarcasm getting your message through. Is that, you know, say if you were to go like, you want to draw attention to the kind of the prejudice, the homophobia, the racism of a certain company, and to do that, you say something. You have a post that says something racist or homophobic, but you're doing it sarcastically. The thing is to be very aware of with that is that you can end up just making something that adds to the
fuels the issue.
Yes. So it's I don't want to say it's a fine line, but you have to be aware that, like, look at the way that things can be read by people who don't have as much knowledge of the situation as you do, and, you know, like, or people are just seeing it at a glance as they go by. It's just something to be aware of. But yeah, I think, like, there's a lot of angles on these things. I mean, once you start thinking about how things can open up, if you're making kind of creative activism, like, I mean, we've talked about putting stickers on things. I mean, you can make entire boxed products and go put them on the shelves in a supermarket. You could, like, there's really, like, so many options when it comes to, and I think there's a lot of power in making something look like it's actually, like, the mask has slipped, and the corporation is actually saying what it actually does not, what, you know, saying the quiet part loud kind of thing. It's saying what all the PR stuff has slipped away. I mean, I always thought about it like at art school, where it was like, if the work I was doing was as if you'd, like, jammed two buttons on the remote, on the TV remote at the same time, and you got somewhere in between the two channels, and it was actually saying all the workings, all the, like, what is actually kind of going on. And showing the dystopia for what it is, because we have there's a veneer that hides the horror of the system that we're living in. All the kind of necessary, like I said, it's necessary for the system, and, like, all the slaughter and oppression and stuff like that, all the stuff that allows this quite comfortable life for Westerners, you know. You can kind of, like, peel back some of that veneer, some of that, often it's just graphic design, basically. You can peel that back, you can kind of show people what the workings are.
So going on from that and kind of bringing it back to basics, and obviously you've spoken a bit about how what's going on in the world and the big corporations, and a kind of reactionist activism has kind of affected you. But when looking at your kind of journey as a creative activist, what has inspired you kind of the most, and has inspired you to get into, like, the work that you've done, and how you constantly keep up to date with those inspirations to produce more work in order to kind of maintain that activism through the creative field?
I think, like, some of the, because there was an aspect I didn't mention when I was, like, talking about kind of like this, you know, obviously at the right wing kind of nationalist phase, but then around the same time I was studying to go into advertising, and I thought that's what I wanted to. I thought that was a great way of making a living. Coming up with funny ideas, you know, like just like smart, like, little slogans, whatever. I didn't realize until I started studying it that advertising is a really deeply unethical way to make a living. It's a kind of human misery machine, you know. It thrives off people being uncomfortable in their own skin and feeling anxious enough to buy something and stuff like that. So, but there was a few things that were kind of instrumental in getting me out of that way of thinking, that somehow that was okay, that it was still okay to go into advertising. And there's the group, the Yes Men. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they were like, they do a lot of, I guess, kind of almost pranks, where they would set up things like a fake World Trade Organization website. Like the domain name would just be slightly different, and then they would get and make it look like it's World Trade Organization, and they would get requests to come and give talks at seminars and stuff like that, and they would go in and start talking like I was saying the quiet part loud. They'd say what they think, that what we know that the World Trade Organization actually hates and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think once I started to see that I didn't have to get a job in advertising to make funny, funny things. Or that, I'd say like, I don't know. I so there's a few things like that like kind of showed me a way out. Like, oh yeah, you can just make stuff. You don't have to do it for a job. You can just make stuff and put it out there.
Yeah.
But in terms of like kind of like ongoing inspiration, I mean, I'm inspired by other artists. I think in terms of politically, I'm often like as much as I'm very inspired by political thinkers and people that I follow on Twitter and things like that. But I'm almost more inspired by the people that I disagree with, because sometimes like if you, I mean, I try and not spend all day arguing online, but I do. The one thing that, because it does feel very futile to kind of
We've all been there.
We've
all been there.
But there is something that kind of can sometimes come out of it in that like you can dig down to like the absurdity of some of these positions that people have on it, and like I find it sometimes inspiring to be like, rather than, you're never going to win some argument with some like bigot online. They're never going to like go, oh, I never thought of it like that, and but I can like sometimes inspired by it, going like, rather than spend all day going over this, I'm going to go and make something that will prove that you're wrong.
So that's where your inspiration comes from. Take
that energy and that anger and put it into something that actually matters, like, I mean, I often thought like, if MI5 wanted to like waste my fucking time, they would just get people to argue with me online. And that would be perfect. I would just be like, oh, and another thing, like, it's pointless. There's times when it has a point, I think, like if people make public statements, especially on Facebook or something, someone's making an abhorrent that's a public forum, and like it's worth it that other people see that it was challenged, But I think we need to be wary of and careful about where our energy's been expended, and that there are better places to put it than yelling at people who are never going to change their mind.
For sure. I think
I definitely agree.
Darren, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and really eye-opening, actually. Especially as someone who, for myself, I guess creative activism is never something that I've really thought of, just in the sense that like I've never seen myself as like an artist. But you've made it really clear that you don't necessarily have to be Picasso to make something that's satirical, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess just as a last question, just to round up what we've been speaking about, what would you say has been maybe your proudest moment as a creative activist, Darren?
It's hard to think about like a specific moment. I mean, I'm very proud of the stuff that I've done with Veterans of Peace in general, and like that stuff. A lot of that work came out of I didn't know any veterans, like but I started making work that was inspired by army recruitment ads, and I was like, I wanted to do something that was against army recruitment ads. So, but I always tried to do that in a way that was like attacking the institution and trying to be sympathetic to soldiers as being and service people in general as being victims of that machinery. A lot of the time they're economic conscripts, it's like, and then when I met like a lot of people from Veterans of Peace through doing this like anti-army recruitment comic I did called Join the Army in 2013, it was really nice to that a lot of those the veterans in Veterans of Peace saw it in that way, that they saw that I was not it was a lot of it was quite scathing about and quite dark about the experience of soldiery and like what soldiers do, and but it was not coming from a kind of like, you're all baby killers, So I think that and then that led to like working with them and stuff like that. And I'm very proud of all the work that I've done with Veterans for Peace, and I think that they are like an incredible organization, because it's one of these things, like for any of us to be talking about the army and like, you know, like the British Army being bad, or the whatever, like, you know, air strikes being bad or whatever, people are very easy, it's very easy for kind of right wingers to dismiss us as just like, you know, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But when you've got someone who's been in like several theatres of war telling you about how his job in the SAS was to kidnap taxi drivers in Iraq who he knew were not militant, and hand them over to the Americans to be tortured. You can't call him they can't call him a coward for walking away from that, because
of course, man.
And I think they're possibly one of the most potentially and actually one of the most effective kind of peace organizations in the country, because they disrupt that narrative of anti-war activists just being all like you know, hippies or whatever the fuck.
Pacifist.
I don't know. Like,
I mean, I mean, Darren, I've got to say, it sounds like an incredibly powerful collaboration that, you know, the fact that you two were able to, you know, connect on that.
But there's one point I was going to say about you saying about the about non-artists, whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, at art school, it like took me fucking like 3 years to dare to call myself an artist. You know, like, because it's like feels like it's a special term. You need to get a kind of like a certificate or something to be an artist. But I think there's something I'm very keen, and I think what the kind of subvertising movement tries to disassemble is this idea of like that there are certain people that can make art activism, and they're the gatekeepers. I have like, you know, because I have people coming to me with like ideas for posters, and they're like, I've got an idea if you should do this poster. And I'm like, what? It's your idea. You make the poster. You know, like you've had the idea. That's half the work. You know?
Yeah.
And I think the idea that only certain people are creative is something that's fed to us and stuff like this. Everyone's creative. My mum's creative. You know, she's like designed her garden. You know, like whatever. I think it's something that it's worth kind of getting past and going like, actually, yeah, if you can pick up a paintbrush and write some letters on a poster, then you can make creative activism. And even if you can't do that, you can do creative activism. So yeah, I think that's just it's the point to make, that like there are ways. If you don't have a certain skill, then you can do it in a different way. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's a really important message for all kind of activists, young, whatever age you are, that are getting involved in terms of any field of activism, but especially creative activism. It's very, very important. I want to say a big thank you to Darren for coming onto our show and for giving us an amazing conversation. It's been, like Joseph said before, like really amazing and like truly enlightening in terms of specifically creative activism and coming from that point of view, but just generally as a conversation. I think it's been amazing. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. Massive thank you, Darren. I've learned loads, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. Big thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
And be sure to stay up to date with all of Darren's work by following him at Spelling Mistakes Cost Lives. And of course, be sure to stay up to date with us by following us on Facebook and Instagram at Apartheid Off Campus. And you can find us at AOC_movement on Twitter. The future is radical. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Sing it with me now. Free Palestine. 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 Palestine remains in my heart forever. We stand for peace, times of war. We shan't surrender. Remember, it didn't start in this dark December. Every coin is a bullet.